Hi, I'm Noah Bradley with handmadehouses.com. Today I'd like to answer a question that I get all the time. What do I think of the tiny house movement? The short answer to what do I think of the tiny house movement is I absolutely love it. I think it is one of the most wonderful things that can be going on. I love the people that are involved with the movement. They're young people mostly, they're energetic. They want to build their own home. They want it to be custom made to exactly what they want in life. They're a little bit rebellious against the government, and they want the freedom to travel, and they want to express themselves with their hands, with the workmanship of their hands, and they want to avoid that lifelong imprisonment that so many people face today with mortgages. It's just you can't go wrong with all that. And I tell you the truth, I've been building small houses all my life, but I've never built what I would call a tiny house. I'm standing today in front of a small log cabin I built, and I've literally built probably dozens of homes within this size range. It's about 600 square feet. It's a very practical size to have, and it's tight for a lot of people, but it's an ideal starter size home for people. And one of the virtues that I find with the tiny house community, with those within it, not only are they great people and everything else, but they're open-minded. And so with that lead in, I'd like to tell you some of the shortcomings of the tiny house movement and how that those are within it, those who are considering it, that perhaps they will consider the handmade house movement, and which answers a lot of the shortcomings of the tiny house movement. And so if I could, with all due respect, address some of the issues that perhaps other people have thought of, but maybe don't step forward to say just because they're worried about being politically correct. But so I'm making this statement not to insult any within the tiny house movement, but nonetheless for those who are considering it, to consider these issues. First of all is land. And that is that I think that I think that land is actually more important than the house. That land is a place for us to live, it's a place for us to park, it's a place for us to drill a well or gather our water, it's a place for us to put our stuff, it's a place for us to build our house, it's a place for us to gather wood or put solar panels up in order to power our home. It's a place that we can grow our own food. Land is everything. I would rather have a nice piece of land and live in a tent than I would in a house. And in fact, I lived almost a year of my life in a tent on a piece of land, and I lived for 5 years in a camper trailer. So I stand behind what I say, that land is more important than a house. And I think that the reason why people go with the tiny house movement is because land is so expensive that they're trying to get past that in order to get a home to live in. And I can fully appreciate that, but in the scope of things, yes indeed, when you're making payments on land, it is an expensive thing, but for the value of what land provides a person, it's by far the wisest purchase any of us can make. So land being number one. Second issue is the economy of scale, and that is that it's a known fact that the larger a home is, the cheaper per square foot it gets. That literally a 8,000 square foot home, the square footage on it per square foot is about half of what, say, 1,000 square foot home would be. And that's because what you're creating is volume of air within the structure. You're not necessarily using that much material. And when you shrink it on and on, a well costs as much for an 8,000 square foot house as it does for a 1,000 square foot house. So the more you shrink, the more expensive a house becomes, and eventually there is a point where it just doesn't make sense to shrink any further, or else it starts to get astronomically expensive, and you're spending more money. It just doesn't make sense. That literally I can build a 12-foot long wall for about the same cost I can for a 6-foot wall, and about the same amount of labor once I get started on it. So there's an economy of scale, and from that, in my opinion, that once you get down to about 600 square feet, suddenly it just doesn't make any sense to go any smaller than 600 square feet. Item 3 is that most of these tiny houses are built on a trailer platform so that they can be mobile. The fact of the matter is that they're not good hauling things to go down the road. I wouldn't want to be behind one on a highway with the fear that parts will come flying off of it. It weighs far too much. Camper trailers have already been invented and perfected. They've been building them since the 1920s. There's a lot of already inventing the wheel ahead of us that you can't possibly build one out of wood and make it equally viable to what a camper trailer is. The fourth issue is that I find that I myself am a bit of an introvert. I like my privacy. It's one of the reasons I build log cabins up in the woods and on top of mountaintops, is I like peace and quiet. I like my privacy. When you live in a tiny home, you are the subject of attention. I have seen this more than once, that if you're driving down the road with a tiny house behind you, everyone's pointing, everyone's looking at you. If you pull into a campground, everyone's knocking on your door and wanting a private tour of it. You are the center of attention. Now, if you want to be the center of attention, a tiny house is what you want. If you want to travel incognito and not be noticed and have your privacy where you go and where you live, then a tiny house is not perhaps the best option for you. Then there's the issue of, first of all, of being accepted by your local community and your government. As there's plenty of issues in the homes that I build that they are alternative homes. A handmade house is a blend of modern construction, alternative construction, as well as historic construction. You view all of them and you combine the best of each one of them into a home that you find most comfortable, that meets who you are. Whereas a tiny house doesn't quite fit into that category, and is quite often under extreme scrutiny as being too small of a home for a community, so they're often booted. The next issue is practicality of space. And I know that a lot of people come back and they say, well, I like living in a small space. I like it. But the fact of the matter is, a shared restroom with a friend coming by who might have a stomach virus, it wouldn't be a pleasant experience, in my opinion, to be in one of those real tiny houses with that going on. And plus there's the issue of stuff. Of just if you're the type of person who wants a tiny house, chances are you want to garden. Where do you put your garden tools? If you want to build your own home, where are you going to put your tools at when you get done with it? Where do you start your garden hose, your outdoor chairs, your furniture? And then there's the issue of where do you park it? Where are you going to live full time? Where is your water source coming from? Your electrical source, your septic source coming from? When you own your own piece of land, all of these things are yours to be had, to apply and everything else. And whereas when you're just got the mobile home, you're basically trapped into either mooching off of somebody close to you and parking on their land and taking advantage of what they're paying for, or else you're being constantly paying rent in places that you can park your place. Next of all is theft. This is 600 square feet. It was a log cabin that I took down and I salvaged and re-erected here on the site. It was probably 200 years old when I took it down. It'll be here for another 200 years. The newspaper is full of incidences where people come home to their tiny house to find that the tiny house is gone. that it is a mobile structure and that people can hook up a vehicle to it and it can disappear. That's not a pleasant thing to have a home that disappears. And one other issue that I have with a tiny house is that is the defining feature of the entire community. And I find this throughout a lot of the alternative types of home construction, whether you're talking the log cabin crowd or the stone crowd or the hay bale people or the timber framers, that it seems like that you fall into one niche and you promote that as being the ultimate, and then anything outside of that community, any other different thinking, any other combination, the idea of blending several of those factors together is somehow offensive to the community. And it's a real shame because the tiny house community is just full of just the best, the cream of the crop. I love these people so much more than a lot of the modern construction that's going on. I love the way that they think and everything, but nonetheless, if you get within this community and you decide you want to build a tiny house, you are welcomed with full arms. But if you ever want to add on to it, suddenly you don't have a tiny house anymore, and so you no longer belong to the community. It's sort of like you're a traitor, or that was a phase that you've gone through in life. Whereas with a handmade house community, it doesn't matter if your house is small or it's large, that you're welcomed within it, and you can graduate through the different periods, and you're already accepted. You're not worried about getting the boot. So there is that as well. Also, another feature of the tiny house is that everything that was within a large house is compressed into a tiny house. Inside of there is your laundry room, your kitchen, your bathroom, your living room, and your office. And you can't help but wonder, how do you ever add to a structure like that? What room would you add? If you added a kitchen to it, a larger kitchen, say you wanted to do more cooking and you had your children or whatever, and you wanted to add to it, well, what are you going to do with the existing kitchen you have? Anything that you have would be replicated, and you're having to build the same room twice. And if you don't own land and you don't have a trailer, then there's no opportunity to add to it. And there's two more issues I have with the tiny house movement. One of them is that there's no standard for construction. There's no style. There's nothing other than defining it as tiny. If it's a tiny house, if it's small as enough to fit on a trailer, then it is a loved structure. If it is larger than that, then it is something to be looked down upon. There's no aesthetic scale going on, and that is that a house can be absolutely ugly, absolutely terrible, an eyesore to be looked at and everything else, but nonetheless it's small and so it's loved. There's no standard for trying to make it environmentally friendly or attractive or durable. That is the one and only standard. And then finally, I would say that when you build a home such as what I'm standing in front of today, you build it, you put your money into it, you put your time and effort into it, you build something beautiful, and then the time comes that maybe you want to move, that your family changes, your family dynamics change, you decide you want to live in a different area of the country. It's just time to move, and so you need to sell it. I've not seen the greatest resale value in tiny homes, that the amount of effort and labor that goes into them makes them very expensive structures. Whereas if you were to put the same amount of money in something like this, or if you wanted to live small and you wanted a mobile structure to buy something like a camper, that both of those you can turn around and get your money back out of. Okay, well, that wraps it up for me today there. Again, I'd like to emphasize that my intention here is not to insult the tiny house movement at all. It's to embrace anyone that loves tiny houses. I love small houses. I think that small houses are the most attractive homes there are. Even when you get into a larger home, I prefer a small house connected to a small house connected to a small house. I think that they're the most attractive structures you can have. So starting small is a great thing. Just don't make it too small. Okay, thank you for joining me today. We look forward to seeing you in the next video. I'm Noah Bradley with handmadehouses.com. Come see us sometime. Tune into the Handmade House TV series where you'll see more of me rambling on. Take care. Thank you very much.